Works for me.
Welcome to Aviate New Mexico, where we talk about aviation in the land of enchantment. I'm your host, Will Fitzpatrick.
And Mo Jando.
Today's going to be a little special because we're not just going to talk about aviation as Aviate New Mexico. We're going to talk a little bit also on behalf of one of our clubs that we participate in here at Top Gun. So obviously the Top Gun background, as you guys see, and the beautiful balloons behind Morgan. We haven't had a podcast / vlog in a while, and part of that is we just have busy schedules. Morgan is up flying and doing his corporate gig, so we're glad to have you back. Morgan, how's flying been up there?
Slow, but awesome. The flying, it's extremely slow.
That's okay. I'm just glad you're having a good time and you're having fun.
Oh, yeah.
But today's going to be interesting because what we're talking about is something near and dear to our hearts. October is just around the corner.
Literally.
Yeah, and October is kind of a big deal for us, isn't it, Morgan?
Every year.
Every year. Now, this year, unfortunately, is a little bit different. So what we're going to talk about is, if you're a pilot that you operate in the Albuquerque area, or if you're coming in to fly with us, there's some things that are a little bit different this year because we're not going to be flying under waivers and TFRs and operations manuals. So we just kind of want to remind people what the airspace is like around here, what different nuances that you're going to have. We're going to put up some visual aids, so hopefully you get a good idea of what's going on. And Morgan and I are going to talk about, obviously being local pilots to Albuquerque, what things that you should be cognizant of and really pay attention to. And Morgan, anytime, jump in if you got anything to comment, but I'm going to share my screen real quick so we can talk about the lovely airspace of New Mexico and Albuquerque specifically. Morgan, can you see that?
Yeah, we're all clear.
Awesome. Okay, so what we're talking about is, usually when we operate this time of year, there is agreements with air traffic control that is found at different events. This year, we're not going to have any waivers or any type of TFRs, any type of operations manuals that are really going to preclude us from having to do what we have to do as airmen. And radio communication is one of those things. And I think radio communication is something that is scary for either new pilots or already certified pilots that don't have to do it that much.
Mm-hmm.
Morgan, do you like talking on the radio?
It's a 50-50. It depends on the day. But
I agree. And it's weird flying airplanes and then flying balloons, how I talk on the radio to the tower or approach or anything changes a little bit. I'm a lot more relaxed on the balloon, and I think we're going to talk about some of those things. So the operating area that we're looking at obviously is going to be the greater Albuquerque area, and we have two major airspaces here that we have to contend with. So we have the Class Delta airspace that is going to be around Double Eagle. This is what a lot of people who fly Albuquerque year-round are very, very familiar with. But if you're not familiar with flying out on the west side of Albuquerque, that's what we really want to talk about. Rio Rancho is right up here. And actually the field that most of us take off from, and I'm actually going to change the layer. If we zoom in, the field we usually take off from is right around here. Can you see my cursor right there?
Yep.
So that would be West Side and Unser Boulevard. And there's a couple considerations that we really want to talk about when we talk about operating in this area. First and foremost, if we go back out to the Delta, and we'll pull up the VFR chart so everybody can see. Excellent. Morgan, I know you and I went over this many times in our training and everything. So the top of that airspace for Delta, highlighted in that big blue box, just as a review for everybody, 7,500 foot. From the surface to 7,500 foot. And there's 2 runways here. So one of the big ones that I really want to show is this runway here has an instrument approach. And this is the localizer. The approach fix. The localizer's over here, but the approach fix right here is Dudley. And this is why I want everybody to be very conscious of what we're talking about when it comes to Dudley, because where we take off from is right over in here. You have airplanes coming in, I believe it's 7,200 foot is what the approach is. We can pull up the IFR chart in a sec if we want to, but now we're VFR, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so airplanes descending and everything, if they're under the hood or they're watching their instruments, yes, you're supposed to have a safety pilot on board, but say, we were 500 foot below a cloud deck, and that cloud deck was 7,700 foot hypothetically, and where they're coming in to hit that approach fix, it's 7,200 if that's what the numbers are. Then they're right on a direct line with where they need to go, and closure speeds and stuff like that, we're talking 3 to 5 seconds to really react. So we want everybody to be conscious about Dudley and this approach fix for the ILS approach into Double Eagle. And yes, you don't need to make contact to the Class D until pretty much you're into the Delta airspace.
Which if you're flying side and you go south, you're pretty much in it once you get into the Arroyo or just before it. And there's also a tower at the top of the hill that's pretty noticeable that is basically on the line between Double Eagle and just general Class E. So when you're flying in that direction, just be conscious of your area. If you have an iPad on board, I'm sure everybody or a lot of people run the hot air app. They have a lot of KML maps for that specific thing that we're looking at, just in a lot cleaner format.
Right.
So just be aware, where you're flying and whatnot.
Yeah, and let's talk about also that arrival or through flight entry requirements. Just as a little review, this is going to be something for all of us to kind of review, and it's just good information for us to know. So arrival or through flight entry requirements into the Class Delta is 2-way radio communication must be established with the air traffic control facility providing air traffic control services prior to entry, and thereafter maintain those communications while in the Class D airspace. Pilots of arriving aircraft should contact the control tower on the publicized frequency and give their position, altitude, destination, and any request. Radio contact should be initiated far enough from the Class D airspace boundary to preclude entering the Class D airspace before 2-way radio communications are established. So, I know we're traveling pretty slow usually in the balloon, but it's probably smart of us to contact outside the keyhole or the Class Delta itself a little bit of ways, just so we know what's going on, and let the controllers know.
With the amount of balloons that are probably going to be flying from us west side this weekend and the weekend after, it's probably just a good idea to get in the habit of just grabbing the radio, making sure it's on, making sure you're on the right frequency, which the frequency from what I'm seeing here, control tower 120.15.
That's
and
correct.
They're pretty they've told me, not to worry about calling unless we get close. But just call them just in case, especially with the amount of traffic that could very well be in Albuquerque this next weekend, the weekend after, or so on through the week next week.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing that you bring up is now remember, you're going to be making a request and they're going to be giving you a direction or some type of guidance. So just telling them that you're there and everything and giving them that situational awareness and say, hey, I'm so many miles north of the field or south of the field, whatever your position is and your altitude. They may come back and they may give you hey, if you get closer to the field, say like 2 miles from the field, then give us another call so we know what your intentions are and everything. But that is the controller giving you a direction at that point, and then you confirm that communication. Don't just try to sneak into the airspace and be like, oh, well, I'm a balloon. They know that we're here all the time. That's very true, but you have a duty as an airman to contact those control facilities when you're flying in that airspace. That doesn't, just because they know that we fly out there all the time, doesn't take away your responsibility as an airman to establish that two-way communication with the control tower. Even during the event that usually happens in October, the requirement to contact Double Eagle Tower or airport when flying within the Class D airspace has never been waived. And when in contact with Double Eagle, pilots must follow their directions. If you are not in communication with the tower at Double Eagle and you're within 1 nautical mile of Double Eagle Airport, you must either land your balloon or climb above 7,500 foot MSL and fly over the airport. That's what the events operations manual states. Really what I would say at that point is, maintain that communication when you're within the Delta at all times. It's incredibly important. And listen to what the controllers are saying and take that direction. If you can't comply with that, either land outside the Delta before you get there, before you have to make communication, or that 7,500 foot, which is the ceiling of the Class D airspace. Then you can climb over those aspects. And we're going to talk about PZs also in this video a little bit. So we're going to talk about both the airspace and then the landowner relations and the prohibited zones. And that is actually, if you want the most current prohibited zone map, you can go to Balloon Fiesta's website, and they have the ability for you to download those PZs so you can have what the latest information is. Obviously, regulatory-wise, PZs are not an FAA thing. PZs are a community standard thing that we develop with the community relations and the landowners and those individuals. So definitely take that into consideration. Download those maps and be conscious of your minimum altitudes over those PZs. And please be a good steward and representative of the balloon community.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Morgan, like you said, Double Eagle Tower frequency when it's in operation 0600 to 2200. So pretty much our flight envelope when we would be flying. 120.15 is going to be tower frequency. And those are the frequencies to contact Double Eagle Tower for the Class D airspace. One thing I want to point out, and we're going to pull up this other screen, is this is the Class D airspace on the west side of Albuquerque and the Rio Rancho area. And you can see this three-dimensional model. How's that coming through, Morgan?
Perfect.
Excellent. So you see in the three-dimensional model where it kind of butts up with where some of the more common launch areas are. This is West Side Unser right here, the Russ Medical Center.
And that shows the arroyo that I was talking about earlier, is that once you get to that point, you're basically in it. So definitely want to make that contact. And then you can see the water tower where it's basically on the line of the keyhole, almost dead center. And I believe that's actually where the point that you were talking about earlier.
Yep, that's the approach fix. That's Dudley.
So that would be a good reference point for anyone and everyone that's not familiar with the area. Is that water tower is that class of airspace, and then the neighborhood in the arroyo is that class of airspace. So that's where you want to make your contact with the tower.
Yeah, and you can see it's pretty close to where that launch site is right here. We're not talking very far to the keyhole from the surface to 7,500 MSL. And so, making contact before there, I understand most people are going to say, hey, there's 40 balloons flying, there's 80 balloons flying, there's no matter how many balloons are going to be flying, we're going to overload the air traffic controller. And I understand that. I understand where that sentiment comes from. But at the same time, we have to give them that understanding of us in the airspace, because we do not have a transponder like other aircraft do. We're not squawking 1200. They're not seeing that on any type of radar scope like they would for into Albuquerque if you're flying an airplane. Center doesn't see us. So that two-way communication is the thing that's the most important, even more so for us than what you would really think for just like airplanes. Radio communication is a critical link in the air traffic control system, and the link can be strong bond between the pilot and the controller, or it can be broken with surprising speed and disastrous results. So if you want to know what I'm actually talking about and where I'm getting all this verbiage from, it's actually section 2 in the AIM for radio communications, phraseology, and techniques. I know a lot of us get our certificates, and then afterwards we just say, okay, cool, well, I get it, or I'll avoid the situation altogether so I don't have to do it. And a lot of people are really freaked out about talking on the radio with a controller.
And they're
Go ahead.
they're really nice. I've never had a bad situation with the control towers. In Albuquerque, Double Eagle, a few others out in Texas and in Louisiana. They were all very lenient and understanding of what I was doing, especially being a hot air balloon.
Well, and I think that's the biggest thing, is the single most important thought in a pilot controller communication is understanding and conveying what's going on and how that is it. You're reacting with the environment and you're flying in that environment. But it's essential, therefore, that pilots acknowledge each radio communication with air traffic control by using the appropriate aircraft call sign. So oddly enough, Morgan and I had a common instructor, and I used to say all the time, well, we need to call our tail number. And our instructor would say, we don't have a tail, so we can't have a tail number. So yes, your aircraft call sign, which is important. Another thing that I think becomes super important, it's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, but I understand where it comes from, is brevity and getting the information out in a clear, concise way in a short amount of time. So I don't ever want you to be in a rush, but you should do things quickly at your pace and what you're comfortable with. But it's not a CB radio. It's not something that you just sit there and you talk with your friend like you're on the phone. There is brevity, and there are other individuals that are using that. And contact should be kept as brief as possible. But the controllers must know what you want to do before you can properly carry out, before they can properly carry out their control duties. So, telling who you are, where you're at, what your altitude is, what your request is super important in this, so they know what's going on. And like we said, they may abbreviate it to say, hey, until you get within like that 2-mile ring of the airport, just have a good day, that type of aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So another interesting thing I think we want to point out is how close the Class Charlie is to the Delta. It actually overlaps.
I was going to say, I think it actually overtakes some of the Class D airspace.
Yeah, so they sit right on top of each other. So it's a shelf that sits out here to the outer boundary of what the Class C airspace is. And it's not that they actually, the Class C doesn't overtake it. The Class C sits right on top of the Class Delta. So you have the Delta that goes to 7,500. And then this, let's see, this ring should be 6,900, surface of 9,400. So this one's 6,900. Actually, yes, you're right. It does intersect in here. And really on this eastern section, you need to be in contact also with the Charlie. So wait for the handoff if you're going to exit the Delta. If you're under Delta control, you know, talk to Double Eagle Tower and then wait for the handoff for a frequency change to go to the Charlie if you're within this specific area. But if you start floating to the east at all from like any of the takeoff spots, or if we take off anywhere in the city, you know, notice that there is a shelf. So it is 6,900 foot MSL all the way up to 9,400 foot. And if we zoom in, you can see
Blurry. No.
very blurry, but you can actually see there is a shelf here compared to the Delta. So this is the Delta, and then out here is the Charlie, and it starts at 6,900. It's not very far from each other. And then our inner ring, obviously, we're going to start to get over. I'm going to actually move over to ForeFlight so we can see this. So here's our Charlie airspace. Ugh, there we go. Charlie airspace encompasses almost all of Albuquerque. Now, so if you're flying more than 6,900 foot until you get to this inner ring, you know, you really should be contacting Albuquerque approach. And Albuquerque approach control, they're probably going to give you the same thing, you know, hey, until you get to such and such of a location, have fun, go fly. We'll try to do visual separation with the other aircraft. They're probably anticipating that we're going to have quite a few airplanes that are quite a few balloons that are going to be flying at the time. But unlike when the larger events happen, either Top Gun itself or Balloon Fiesta or any of the other large events, you know, there is no TFR or there is no waiver that gives a NOTAM. And there isn't a notice to airmen that is going to be going out. That there might be something that is an overview that says, hey, notice to airmen, there's going to be a large amount of balloon activity in the area, but it is not a NOTAM for like an event. So we'll have to figure out if somebody does file a NOTAM or if the FAA is going to take on that, or if we need to do that. But there is no notice to airmen to say, hey, there's going to be balloon activity in the area. I'm pretty sure they're predicting it.
Yeah. Well, especially with all the news and whatnot that's been going on in our community. I'm sure they have knowledge of it.
Yeah, but let's be judicious and also take into the worst case scenario that, yeah, there's a lot of people who are talking about it and maybe they have predicted it. I guarantee you the controllers are already anticipating it, but there may not be a NOTAM that has been filed because nobody's taken under that credit. Now, Lifting Spirits, which might be happening, will probably have some sort of NOTAM in there. But for the rest of the week, if there's flying or if it's not a Top Gun competition weekend or if we're just out fun flying, there's not NOTAMs that are filed. So, you know, be conscious of the other air traffic that's going to be flying. So, interesting thing about Albuquerque is a Class C airspace. Most of the time that I fly, though, you're going to be able to get approach on 123.9er. So 123.9er is going to be the approach that you need to be able to contact Albuquerque when flying. I think it's pretty important, though, to kind of talk about, because this is, I think, the biggest difference between some of the operating manuals that we've seen over the last couple of years when we're flying the big events, because truly it states in some of those operation manuals that the requirement to contact the Albuquerque International Sunport when flying within Class C airspace has been waived for that event. Now, notice we don't have an event going on, or even if you're flying Top Gun, we don't have that in our waivers. So that requirement is in place, and you need to contact Albuquerque Approach Control for them to be able to understand where everybody is in the airspace. And I think that's just something we want to remind everybody. Most of you guys know that it's there, but it's it's just a good reminder for all of us to kind of take into account when we go out and fly, especially if there's going to be quite a few balloons flying in the area. And Morgan, what has been your, I think you talked a little bit about it. What is your, I don't know, experiences when talking to Albuquerque, Ben?
I'd say it isn't much different from double eagle. They actually, I would say the big difference is waiting to let them conversate or contact you back, as well as we do with double eagle. But double eagle, sometimes it's okay just to be able to go, hey, I'm here. This is my number. This is where I'm at. I'm this many miles out to your northeast or whatever. But Albuquerque, it's a little more strict. Hey, hot air balloon November 47 Alpha Vector to Albuquerque Tower, and then you pause and you wait for them to contact you back, because double eagle's a lot more lenient with that stuff. So to an extent, I'd say it's a little more strict, but still very understanding and kind of comforting to an extent.
Yeah, so I kind of want to go over some of those things. This is, if you want to follow along, everybody out there in the aviation world, this is right out of the AIM, out of 4-2-2. Oh my goodness, I feel like a flight instructor now. But first and foremost, listen before you transmit. Many times you can get the information you want through ATIS or by monitoring the frequency, except for a few situations where some frequency overlap occurs. If you hear someone else talking, the keying of your transmitter will be futile and you will probably jam their receivers, causing them to repeat their call. If you have just changed frequencies, pause, listen, and make sure the frequency is clear. That's another thing I want to bring up, obviously, on our ATIS. ATIS for Albuquerque is going to be 118.0. So we're going to be able to get the information for what is going on at Albuquerque out of the ATIS at 118.0. You'll get your weather and your calls and everything like that. So there's going to be a lot of those aspects. But when you transmit over the approach frequency 123.9er, think about what you're first. Listen what's going on, and I think Morgan, you pointed that out perfectly. And everybody's heard somebody step on each other on frequency. It gets all garbled, and then somebody's got to repeat again. So just have some patience. But I think this is the next big one, especially if you don't communicate with air traffic control a lot. It is something that's so important. Think before keying your transmitter. Know what you want to say, and if it's lengthy, jot it down. If it's something, now obviously we're not doing IFR flight plans or anything like that, so it's not going to be super long. But know what you're going to say. The microphone should be very close to your lips, and after pressing the mic button, a slight pause may be necessary to make sure that the first words are transmitted. So just don't jam that button and start talking. Key the mic and then wait a little bit before you start speaking so everything's coming in. And then when you release the button, wait a few seconds before calling again. The controller, maybe jotting down your number, looking for your flight plan, transmitting on a different frequency, or selecting a transmitter for your frequency. So just be conscious of those things.
And forget to say hot air balloon before, because they'll hear the end number and think it's a tail number and start looking for those, where are you on, say, radar or whatever. So make sure that you're clear, hot air balloon, and then your end number.
Yeah, so I think that's another one that's pointed out on initial contact. In terms of initial contact, make sure, so first and foremost, name of the facility being called. So Albuquerque approach. And your full aircraft identification as filed in a flight plan, or what your end number is for us, make it the full one. Now, they may shorten it after they have your full end number to like your last four, which is very common. But when you're doing your initial call up, obviously always use your full aircraft call sign. And when operating there, you need to be able to tell them what you're doing and what you really want to happen. So let's see. I'm going to go through. I know what it is off the top of my head, but I also want to reference the AIM so I don't misquote anybody. And And if everybody wants to like review these things, which is great for all of us to review every once in a while, is, just get into the aim. It's not a secret on how to do these things. So then you can go review it, especially if you're rusty, if you haven't had to call any type of air traffic controllers or anything like that.
And out here, we don't have many airports. So I try and, reread my, excuse me, reread my stuff, act like I'm talking to the tower or wherever. So it's definitely good habit to get into, just in that consistency and remembering what you need to say and how to say it and such, especially with these rural areas when it comes to flying.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing here is like, what's your request? There's that 3-piece aspect when you're talking to air traffic control, which is, who you are and your request. And then air traffic control is going to come back and give you some type of direction. And then there's a confirmation of what they have directed you to do. And those are the type things that we really got to be kind of conscious of. Give them your position, give them your altitude. So it's like ordering a pizza. Who you are, where you're at, what do you want, is kind of how we've always put it out there, and give them that information so they can really get a picture of what the airspace is going on at that point. Yeah. So, Morgan, what else do you want to say about airspace, at least in the Albuquerque area?
It's relatively lenient. Don't get complacent. Don't think that they just assume to see you. Definitely just make that call. Be aware of your surroundings. I believe you said, which one was the Albuquerque approach? 123.9. Was that right?
123.9er. You are correct.
Perfect. So take note of those flight number or those tower numbers, just so you have them. Write them down. Keep them in your wallet, something like that. Especially if you're coming from out of state to New Mexico to fly here. Right. Our airspace is easy. It's probably one of the easier ones.
So I think you brought up a good point. And like I said, normally 123.9er is going to work all the time, but let's be proper about this. If you are south of the Victor 12, it is 123.9er. If you are north of the Victor 12 airway, then it's a 127.4. So
where is your south versus north point?
Okay, we got to now look for Victor Airways. Here's Victor 12.
Okay.
So Victor 12 is going to be right in line with almost the runway. So really, most of us are going to be flying from the north. 127.4 should be your initial properly. So on or north of the Victor 12 for approach control, 127.4. You also have a tertiary of 126.3. Like I said, 123.9 is usually what they're going to do for approach and departure. One of the ways to be able to hear that is pull up that ATIS 118.0, and they'll usually give you some of that information, how to contact clearance delivery and different things like that. Most days, like I said, 123.9er, they're going to use all the time. But if you call 127.4 because you're north of the Victor 12, they're monitoring it. They may ask you to do a frequency change to 123.9er. That's fine. Just like anything else, do what the request is from, do what the controller is telling you, switch over to frequency, make initial contact again because you're on a different frequency. Tell them, hot air balloon because type aircraft, and then your call sign with your registration number, and they'll pick you up on the other frequency if they're not using dual frequencies. Because of the amount of air traffic in the air, though, they may be using both frequencies of 123.9er for below, for south of the Victor 12, and they might be using 127.4 for north of it. So initial contact, if you're flying from the north of the field of the airport, in the Class C, initial contact 127.4, and if you're flying south of the airport, initial contact, 1-2 tree point niner.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
I like this.
Learning is occurring. Hooray. I love it. Yeah, so there's our airspace and stuff. I'm going to come back to us for a little bit. And Morgan, if you got anything else to add, talk to me about PZs and what those are. And a lot of people who are in the balloon community obviously might know what the PZ is, but my airplane friends and my glider friends are going to be like, what the heck is a prohibited zone? Are we talking about prohibited zones like restricted airspace / like prohibited zones on a sectional, or are we talking something different?
Not necessarily. It's more of a community to aviator, specific to ballooning. I guess happiness, you could say.
Okay.
The PZ, when we look at, like, I have it on my hot air, it shows me where I could, or like where landowners are not okay with us landing there, or they're okay but not taking off there. And then there's the green areas, which is a lot of the area, and a lot of the PZs that we deal with are just, one time somebody landed there and it wasn't a good time, and neither the pilot or the landowner was happy at the end of it, but that all comes with time. And we try and work out those landowner relations. So, and each PZ has an elevation to either fly over or stay away from. Typically, they're no more than 500 feet, maybe 1,000 feet. I know that it's 2,000 feet over what was it called? National parks, but that's kind of a different story when it comes to our PZ maps.
Right.
We just, when it comes to those things, it's just making sure we try and abide by those maps. And I wish I could pull one up. I don't know if you have one, Will.
I'm pulling one up right now for our PZ map. It's a pretty intense file. It's a vector JPEG. So one thing actually I want to show everybody. I'm going to share my map real quick. I'll share my screen. So if you go to Balloon Fiesta has always been incredibly good to us in the Albuquerque area with updating the PZ maps for all of us. And so most of the clubs here year round are going to use the PZ maps. So if you go to balloons, there's a thing down here for PZ maps specifically. Go to that, and it's going to bring you up the current PZ maps. You got the PDFs, the JPEGs. If you're using like Google Earth or Hot Air apps on iOS, the KML files, backcountry navigation on Android, the BCN KML files, Garmin, it's got your GPX. So there are a lot of different things for all of us to be able to look at.
Oh, perfect.
Like I said, it's pretty extensive. Let's see if I can pull up another PZ map where we can really zoom into.
Mm-hmm.
It is a big file. Obviously, you're starting to see like some of the airspace and what's going on there. I'm going to move this one over because I think we can zoom in even further. Oh yeah, much better.
Oh, yeah. Well,
So
I mean, there's the point right there. Just those little red zones are no land will take off and be at this altitude to clear the area. And it could just be the landowner. It could be livestock. It could be industrial. I mean, there's a lot of different reasonings on why we have the PZs. Yellow zones are landing, takeoff or national park. Green is obviously good. Our purple up there is the Indian Public, or no, I'm sorry, that's not the Indian Public Culture Center. That is our San Diego Pueblo, and that's the reservation. We can land there, but we try not to just because it's their land.
Yeah,
we do have.
I think there's a huge misconception there. Is the Indian Pueblo is during Fiesta incredibly great to all of us as balloonists. It's nothing to be afraid of. Obviously, they do have some red zone PZs that maintain a minimum altitude over, no landing there. Let's be respectful of the cultural aspects that our neighbors to the north have, but there is some additional paperwork you have to do if you land on the Pueblo. Don't be afraid of it. Great story. 4 years ago, I did not want to land on the Pueblo because I thought the paperwork was going to be too much of a hassle. I think we're going to do a shout out to my friend Jonathan Wright right now, who then decided that in his racer he was going to fly into Placitas, and he made it out there. He made a good call. Now for me though, with how low of a pilot I was, I ended up navigating into here in this area pretty late in the day. It was a competition day. I did not push good aeronautical decision making at that point. I should have just landed where it was a purple zone and done the paperwork. So don't be afraid of it. But like always, especially being a steward of ballooning, being somebody who is in the community, be a good steward. Be respectful of any of these individuals' cultural aspects, but also the land that we're using. Because yes, well, we understand that we can land anywhere for the most part as an aircraft physically, sure. We also want to be good neighbors, and we want to respect those things. So, Morgan, I'm going to let you take it away a little bit more on PZs, though.
So looks like you could see quite a few of them. If you could actually zoom in, there's the red PZ just next to Alameda and Coors.
Is that going to be this one right here?
Yes. Looks like the altitude is about 5,500 MSL. That's what they want you at.
At a
this,
minimum.
I believe, of livestock, and I think that they keep the police horses here.
Oh, nice.
I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure. And so that's a, don't land there, try and be over it. I've landed near it. I've never gone into those PZs or anything of that nature, and then you can even see that there's the Class C airspace just above it. And then there's the PZ just north of that one, which is, again, a red zone, which is Intel. It's more of an industrial, and it's kind of understanding you don't want to be flying over their vents, especially if they're blowing out heat. And then it looks like there's a nice green zone right next to it, which I believe that would be a park. Correct. So when it comes to these PZs, it's just being aware of your surroundings and understanding. It could be livestock, it could be industrial, it could be a vast amount of things, landowner, whatever. Mm-hmm. Just be conscious of it, be aware of it, try not to land there. Of course, in an emergency, you can kind of land anywhere, but try not to have that happen.
Right.
I'm noticing that PZ out in the middle of nowhere. That one, I believe, is a gas. It's a gas or pump company or something.
Yeah, there's a pump station out there.
Yeah, a pump station. So they actually vent excess fuel, which is a big ball of fire, and you don't want to be over that. So I'm sure their altitude to fly over is much higher.
Let's see. I think it's 6,200 for that one right there.
So I mean, that's almost 1,000 feet just from ground level, or AGL. So I mean, you don't want to be over that when they're exhausting that kind of heat. And that's the same reason we have a red PZ over propane on Balloon Fiesta Field, because they do have a release. Once they're done fueling during the event, they release the excess fuel that's in the line, and they can't just release raw propane. They have to release it ignited so it burns off. So it's just again being safe with that area.
Yeah. Actually, let's talk a little bit about like this purple zone down here for Albuquerque. So there's 2 points down in the Albuquerque area that we would really want to talk about. One is the Sunport itself and the international airport, and the other one is Kirtland Air Force Base. And they are 2 different entities, and I think we need to be conscious of it. Albuquerque International Sunport, obviously listen to the controllers. But if you do have to land at the airport, they are very, very, very good with you. One thing that I would like to point out is the old runway of 17 right here is now open. It is an open lot. It is now the Aviation Center of Excellence, but they are open lots. I have landed there before. The controllers are very happy to guide you in. Just be careful of traffic coming in on runway 8 here for the visual for runway 8. That's something that you want to be conscious of. But I've landed right here in what is the old 17 at the Aerospace Center of Excellence. There is a golf course right here. The golf course isn't bad. It is an option, but you can land right here. all of this is airport property. You have shout out to Cutter Aviation. They're over in this area, Cutter Atlantic. There you have some open spots to be able to land, or you can push south of the field and you can land on the other side. And there's plenty of landing out here on the.
And on that note, that comes along with when you talk to the airport about your intentions. Because if you just say, hey, I want to land on the other side of the airport, they're probably going to be okay with it, and they'll guide you, let you stay low and get through the airport to land on the other side. It's just varying, again, on what your intentions are and what you voice to them. If you tell them, hey, I'm just here, and they ask you to ascend to 8,000 feet to say that you can overfly it, that could easily mess up your flight plan. So definitely voice what you want to do. And if they don't, they can obviously tell we actually want you to ascend to 8,000 to overfly the airport, or descend to 6,000 to whatever. But it comes along with intentions.
And the other thing, though, I think that's really good is if the winds start pushing you a bad direction up at that altitude, obviously comply with what they're saying, but then also voice that to the controller and say, hey, look, at this altitude, I'm being pushed way off course to where I need to go. I would really like to continue south, but to get there, I need to be around 7,000 foot, and tell them that so they know what's going on. And they understand that obviously you can't make a left-hand turn and, get a heading of 180 if you wanted it. They know that. The other one is Kirtland Air Force Base. Now, if you land on Kirtland and you're somewhere out here, you're going to have to contact Kirtland Air Force Base. You're going to have to contact law enforcement, and they are going to check you for being on the base and everything. It's not a bad thing. Being an Air Force member in my part-time position, they just want to make sure everything's okay. There is some national security stuff that they need to check. They need to secure that site. They're not there to mess with you. It might take a little bit of a process. They understand it. I've landed on the base before. I contacted the law enforcement desk, said that I was going to make a final approach. The airman was very, very trepidatious about it because, oh my goodness, a balloon's going to land on the base. I would not make that my first intent, obviously, but if you need to, it is an option. But try to avoid landing on Kirtland Air Force Base if possible, because there is going to be paperwork, there is going to be a report that needs to be filled out, and the airmen need to do their job, and they need to be safe and securing the site. So be conscious of it, be cognizant. Obviously, this is one of those things that you can do it. Don't be afraid to do it if you need to do it, but at the same time, remember there's protocols, and you're definitely going to have to talk to the security forces at that point. The airport is a lot better about letting you guys land on certain aspects of the airport. Talk to the tower. Tower is very good, and they understand what's going on. And you also have all these options down to the south here that is not in this purple area. So
yep,
lots of great options for you. Just be conscious.
What's that blue zone?
This is that corridor that you're supposed to be above or below. Now, this is during Fiesta. This is in their operations manual. This is not during this time, but they're still good things to follow, just because the approach corridor coming into runway 8 and why that's important. So obviously not flying under a waiver this year, not flying under a TFR. We do not have that, but a lot of those guidelines that are in there, they've definitely made good concessions in there.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So we've talked about PZs. We've talked about our airspace. We've talked about a lot today. Morgan, is there anything else you want to talk about today?
I don't know. I'm going to talk about whatever. We could sit here for 8 hours talking about balloon stuff, or aviation in general. We
probably could, but I think we've definitely talked enough today about the airspace. We're going to come out with some other things later on. We really like this joint venture that we have between Top Gun and Aviate New Mexico, both being Top Gun members, and hopefully giving you guys a little bit more information on how to hopefully fly within our hometown of Albuquerque.
Mhm.
The other thing, though, is if you guys got questions, if you are an out-of-towner or if you're unfamiliar flying in the city or anything like that, reach out to the club. And I can definitely say this as a president of Top Gun, reach out to Top Gun. We will be there to help mentor you through this. Find a local pilot. Find somebody who's going to be able to kind of show you the ropes or at least help you shadow so you know what's going on so you can go out there and you can fly safe.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So for that, I know it's been a long time, but we're really glad to be back on the air. Later on this week, you'll probably see a couple more presentations from us talking about other topics, especially flying in October in New Mexico. And I hope you join us then.
Absolutely.
Until then, this is Aviate New Mexico, and I'm your host, Will Fitzpatrick.
I'm Mo Chando.